Let's say that we want to implement similar kind of concept, you can see, to all the action method, right? So what we can do, we can simply apply this kind of concept to all the method available in this controller. This is the first way. And the second approach, I will say that what I can do that I can cut this basically URL pattern and paste it on the controller level, right? So let me do it. Let's say I'm going to cut this and I'm going to paste it on the controller level. You can see my screen, right? And let me remove this from here, right? Because we have already applied the route at the controller level, right? So once we have applied our route at the controller level, basically it's called, you can say, it's called your base route, right? And let's say after having this base route URL on the controller level, let's say for any action method, if we are going to perform let's say if we want to append any, yes, any other routing URL. First of all, let me comment out all these route URL, right? Whatever we have defined on the action method. So you can see what I'm gonna do. Basically, I'm commenting all the routes. Let me comment it out, right? Now what we are going to do, let me save the changes. And now what I can do, basically to access any action method, right? I can simply write in the browser, first of all, controller name and accordingly the action name, right? Whatever we want to call. Let me save the changes. Now let's run the application. And after saving the changes, let's run the application and see the output. So simply we are going to pass controller name and action method name. So as you can see in the browser, it's loading. Let's wait for a couple of seconds. Yeah. So now what I'm gonna do, basically, yeah, let's say I want to call this method get data. So what I'll simply do, your your controller name, that is your value, right? And after that we simply need to call your action method. So in this case it would be get data, right? Now simply hit the URL and what we are getting, uh, just a second. Okay, what I have done, basically we need to pass the fully qualified name of the controller name. So if you see there's a spelling mistake, right? So that's a values, not value, right? So now after passing this in the URL, controller name, then action method correspondingly, now I'm going to hit this in the browser and you can see our control is coming over here, right? Yes. So let's click on continue and it's going to give output hollow form get the method, right? Mhm. Now let's say this time we want to call this action method get result. So what we are going to do, simply after controller name we need to pass this method name, you can see. And now we are hitting in the browser. It's again the control is coming to this waypoint and now I'm clicking on the continue button and you can see the expected output follow from get this method, right? Let me stop the application. Okay, one more thing I want to tell you. Let me run the application. Now let's say we want to call this time our this action method, that is our get customer account, right? So let me paste it over here. And as soon as I'm pressing the enter key, you can see our control is coming to this action method. And in this ID parameter, it's going to have a default parameter. Yes. Now let's click on this continue button. Now what it's gonna, yeah, what it is showing to us, output of this method, right? So let's say we want to bind this ID parameter. So how we can do that? Let me show you. And the same with this action method also. We can simply pass the action method name and we will get the default parameter value of these two integer parameter, right? So let me stop the application and let me show you that how we can bind integer ID parameter for this action method. So basically for binding this ID parameter, what we have to do, simply we have to append route. Let's say this time we are going to pass it in this curly bracket, right? And for which parameter we want to bind, let's say ID. So as we have already passed our base route URL on the top of this controller, right? So we simply need to append the other part. So this is how we can append your ID parameter. So let's save the changes and let me run the application and see the output, how it is going to behave. So let's wait. So for simply calling this action method, what we have to write, get customer account, right? So let's say I'm going to put this, and along with this action method, we can pass integer parameter. You can see on the screen ID we are supposed to pass. So let's say I'm going to pass in this parameter, let's say 44. As soon as I'm pressing the enter key, you can see our control is coming to this action method. And if I scroll my mouse to this parameter, you can see we are getting the expected parameter value that we have passed in the browser, 44, right? Now let me click on the continue button and we can see the expected output. So this is how we can basically bind the ID parameter. Yes. So let me stop the application. So this is how we can combine our base route and the route whatever we have defined to particular action method. For example, in this case, we can see here, right? And one more thing, I want to tell you that before we wind up, that why we go for this base route URL, right? Basically, we have a common part on the top of the controller level, right? So basically, let's say when we are having common part for all the action method. So in that case, what are we gonna perform? Basically, we go for the common part on the top of the controller level, right? And according to the particular action method, we can simply append to the base route URL to make it work. And let's say we have a such requirement that we don't want to define this kind of URL to a particular action method. So in that case, what we can do, basically we can define a unique routing URL to any particular action method. So in that case, we can override your base route URL to any of the action method. Let me show you. For example, let's say let me uncomment this. And for overriding any base route URL, we have to denote it with a tilde symbol. Yes. So let's say for this action method, I'm going to override with this tilde symbol. And now for calling this action method, it's not going to call with this pattern, right? So once we want to call this action method in the browser, we need to simply pass this route, this routing pattern. So let me show you. Let's save the changes and let me run the application. You can see our screen has been loaded. Now let's say I want to call this get action method. So what I'm going to do, simply we need to pass API and then the action method name. You can see our control is coming over here. Now let's click on this continue button and we can see the expected output, right? So this is how we can override any base route URL to particular action method. Now let's say for calling this action method, if we are trying to, let's say if we try to call this action by the name of controller and action method name, right? So let's say get data. Now let's hit the enter button. Now you can see we are getting the local host page cannot be found. Why? Because for this action method, now this base route URL is not going to perform because we have already overridden this base route URL with this pattern. So for calling this action method, what we supposed to do, we simply have to pass with API and then get the action method name. Right. Let's say this time, this one, we can see the expected output. You can see, right? So this is how we can basically override your base route URL in your ASP.NET Core Web API. Let me show you once more. You can see, let's say I'm going to uncomment this, right? And for overriding this base route URL, now for this action method, I'm going to override this base route URL. So for that, simply what we need to do, we simply need to pass it simple. So basically, yeah. So to override your base route URL, now let's save the changes. And what I'm going to do, let's run the application. Our application has been loaded in the browser, as you can see. Now let's say for calling this action, whenever I say action or method, meaning is same, right? So let's say I want to access this resource. So the same, we need to pass API and then we need to pass this pattern get result, right? So instead of data, we need to type get result. Now let's see the output. You can see our control is coming in this method. Now let's click on this continue button and we can see the expected output, right? Follow from this. Yes. So this is how we can basically override any base route URL in your web API.